When I first arrived in New Zealand, I was really interested in the notion of the waka, which is the canoes that the Maori arrived into New Zealand from a place they called Hawaii, which is not Hawaii and doesn't exist on any existing map now. But the Maori then identify themselves as to which waka their ancestors, which they call their whakapapa, arrived on. And it obviously brought back to mind my crossing sculptures. You know, I've been interested in the notion of a journey for a long time. And I had made 2 sets of sculptures based on a makoro that I owned, a dugout makoro that I'd bought and owned. I made the first crossing one in 2005. And it was interesting because I think I started making it and initially was just going to have one boat with a figure in, and I had a number of Great Dane puppies who just loved to climb in the boat, and seeing the dogs in the boat it brought something to mind that I wanted to explore. But I abandoned it for a while and sat in the veld outside my house. And then I was invited to be the guest artist at Potchefstroom Art Fair, and I finished the work. And my dad died at that time, and I realized that finishing the work was in a way the crossing for him into the afterlife. It seemed very fitting that was when I finished it. I kept on harking back to a quotation from Laurie Anderson from one of her songs, where she says, "Where I come from, it's a long thin thread across an ocean down a river of red." And it just made me feel that's what my journey to New Zealand was. I'd crossed to an ocean and oceans to get to this oceanic place. And the river of red was my bloodline. It was the feminine, the maternal bloodline, which went back to the early 1800s in New Zealand. I had an exhibition in London in 2020. It had been postponed from the initial date because of COVID, but it still happened. And Georgie, who runs the London gallery, the Everard gallery in London, sent me this beautiful card with an image of a geisha, a woodcut of a geisha on it. And I loved it, and I just pinned it up in my studio. And at the same time, I'd started doing some drawings, come paintings of trees overhanging this water. And I had been looking at some Japanese imagery because for some reason those landscapes reminded me of the Japanese, and using the format of the tall, narrow format for a landscape rather than a traditional horizontal landscape format appealed to me. And I was making these works, but at the same time I was thinking of the geishas and thinking, okay, what really was the geisha? And I started looking at the patterns of the clothing of the geishas and realized that they were the feminine standing for nature. You know, you look at their amazing kimonos and the patterning, which is whether it's tigers and birds or trees and snakes or waves and fish, that they were almost icons of the feminine, including nature. When I started doing the geisha works and realizing that for me, the geisha and the amazing fabrics of the kimonos they wore, which were about nature, I wrote on the wall in my studio, something I often do. And I wrote, "Am I a river? Am I a tree? Am I a mountain? Am I the sea?" And at one point I'd been going to use those words or variations of those as the titles for the work, but I decided to call them all geisha, but I have written those words in each of them. And they're not necessarily easy to read, but by putting them in, they're like a secret code within the work, which will be there for all time. Looking again at my large Deborah sculpture and seeing the woman who is a mountain, or as a mountain becoming the woman, and this water that is welling up within her into this bowl and filling this bowl, it sort of symbolizes that creative welling up is my motherland. And I think of her as this, her bowl, her lap is in itself a grail. The water welling up into her lap, into the bowl, which is part of her. It's her lap, it's not a bowl in her lap. Her lap is a bowl. And it represents for me that upwelling of creativity, which is from, in my sense, the deep spiritual side of myself. And it is also the grail, the kraal, that I talk about in my other works. And Deborah's subtitle is Deborah Forgiveness, and maybe forgiveness is the true coming home to myself.